and welcome to the CNBC Africa Exchange alongside WEF Africa. My name is Nozi Pumbanjwa, and it is an absolute pleasure to be the moderator of this really exciting conversation. We're talking about the journey to 5G in Africa. Now, globally, we know that the conversation is a heated debate between South Korea and the US, both vying for top-notch position for who has first launched 5G commercially. And closer to home, we know that Rain has announced that it's going to be making 5G available in a little over 2 weeks. But the continental conversation is what we're focusing on here, and that is, what does the 5G journey really look like? Leaning into this conversation and bringing their insights and their expertise, I'm joined by, closest to me first, Nicholas Blixel. He's the Vice President responsible for the Middle East and Africa at Ericsson, and next to him is Knott-Craig. He is Executive Chairman at Herotel. Welcome. And last but not least, and privileged for us to have him here, is Antonio Nunes, who is the CEO of Angola Cables. Gentlemen, welcome to this conversation. And so maybe, Nicholas, let me start off with you. If we think about 5G, fundamentally, what is the difference between 5G, what differentiates it between 3G and 4G, and more specifically, what is the superpower that it gives Africa and the world?
Thank you. So the superpower of 5G compared to the previous generations can be explained in 4 different areas. The first one is the most obvious one, which is it's faster. And with all new technologies that are rising from the 4th industrial revolution, such as the virtual reality, augmented reality, 8K television, and so forth, it's needed. So much, much more higher throughput. Then another case, the second one is more called fixed wired access. It's basically the network replaces the fiber to the home. You don't need to dig. You get directly very fast speeds directly to your house from the 5G network. Then when it gets more superpower and different is the massive IoT, basically the Internet of Things. So that 5G can control in a completely different and more optimal way than the previous generation. So you have the massive ones, which are the smart metering that most people would have, the car tracker and so forth. But where it gets really interesting is due to the technology of the very low latency of the 5G technology, is that you can do, for example, remote surgery. The surgeon sits in Australia and performs a surgery to somebody in Cape Town with robotic arms. You can also do autonomous driving, so your car is driving you to the place you want, and it's driven by the network. So this is the superpower we are seeing in use case, and many others that can be more applicable to Africa. Sorry.
So lots of superpowers that Nicholas has put on the table, Ellen, and as he talks about autonomous driving, my mind paints a picture of the traffic in Nairobi, for example, and I think, from that particular market context, that might be quite problematic. So I'd like you to zoom in on the African context and the superpower that 5G would give us with the reality of the African context in mind.
Well, to be honest, I don't think there is a superpower for 5G when it comes to Africa. I think 5G is an amazing technology when it comes to metro areas, so Johannesburg, Cape Town. But to think that 5G is the solution for the vast majority of South Africans is probably not practical, mostly just because there's not enough spectrum. If you were to watch Netflix on 5G for 13.5 million households in South Africa, it's not going to work. It firstly probably wouldn't be able to carry the traffic. Secondly, it'd cost too much money. So for the purposes of, as Nicholas said, faster speeds and application of IoT, especially the advanced IoT, I think it's fantastic technology. For the purposes of the average man in South Africa having a changed internet experience, I don't think it really moves the needle much. The main thing is that the cost of internet is what's holding people back. It's not the speeds. Yeah. When most people in South Africa have enough speed, it costs too much money. So until the cost of connectivity comes down, you won't really see an impact on the ground. I see that in South Korea, they've already launched a 5G network, and after a couple of months, they already have 2% market penetration, but I see their revenues are down as well. So that's good for, it's good for Ericsson, it's good for customers, not so good for the operators themselves. Yeah. So the jury's still out.
So a lot of hot button issues that you raised there. The one is distinguishing between the metro areas and the broader population, because there is the question of whether, if not well managed, we could see a deepening of the digital divide and inequalities, and I'd like to come back to that. But I do want to come back to the question of cost a little bit later. Antonio, I'd like to bring your voice into this conversation, again from an Angolan perspective, but also more broadly on the continent. Do you think that 5G is a superpower? Alan doesn't seem to think it's the silver bullet. What are your thoughts?
I share the same opinion as him. So I think, I think, of course, 5G is a brilliant technology, because the other technology in 2, 3 was based on voice, and now 5G is really based on data. And of course, we are running in that direction. All the industries, the four industry is coming to that direction. But if it's 5G that go to solve the problems in Africa, it's not, okay? Because first of all, we're still battling with basic things like energy, for example. So, and data, we are already available on the different networks that we have in Africa, okay? The problem is really the cost of the service. That's still very high. The African continent is still paying a very high cost for internet access. Okay, so we have to decrease that cost in order to increase the demand of that particular ecosystem. Yeah. That's still very basic in terms of demand. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I'm also agreed that 5G will bring a lot of new demands. Yeah. We are, for example, building the cables just for that particular volume of traffic that we need to process. And of course, only 5G will be able to fill up that pipes, yeah. Okay? And we do need 5G to be operational and full running.
So Nicholas, the case for 5G, very clear. I love the example you use about remote surgery, because we know in many African markets that the access and to quality healthcare is an issue. So very direct, tangible, practical superpower there. But the elephant in the room seems to be the cost, and how that is the real inhibitor of access. How do we fix this? How do we get it right? I mean, we've been having this conversation for some time now.
Yeah, we have it for some time. I remember the same conversation we had for all generations of mobile phone, since 2G, 3G, 4G. I mean, it comes up, and it's very valid arguments. Now, of course, with 5G, bigger data, lower cost, the cost per gigabyte will, of course, go down, benefiting the subscriber, and there are going to be use case for the industries and so forth. But what I want to say is that once the technology is there, I gave a few examples on what can be good, then I believe there will be an ecosystem, new people with new ideas saying, oh, with this throughput and with this latency, I can do this use case. And it will build up, and suddenly we will not be able to live without 5G, just as today we cannot live without 4G. But the whole ecosystem has to be diverse and work together to get there. But of course, now it's the unknown. Yeah. It's really the beginning. Ericsson, we're trying to find use case to show the benefit. But once it's there, the creativity of the Africans, which we have seen many times, even Africans has won the Ericsson Innovation Contest. So I'm confident that we will find some good solutions.
So I just want to stay for a moment, Nicholas, because I think you raise an important issue on the possibility of what's possible when ecosystems come into play. Would ecosystems solve the challenge of it not being a niche, 5G not being a niche capability that only exists in the big metro cities? Could we really see that deep access that really gets to the remote areas and not just the big urban centers?
You can do that. Allow me to be a bit technical.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Just a second. So in order to have a 5G network, you first need a good 4G network. Here in South Africa, they are pretty good over the place. So you need that as a prerequisite. Then, of course, you need the spectrum, which is a discussion. I mean, we have it with the regulator all across the world, because we need a spectrum that is aligned across the world, both in low band, mid-band, high bands. You have three different spectrums.
And Alan's going to speak to us in a moment about the spectrum debate in South Africa.
I just want to say it needs to be the same across the world, because then we can have the economies of scale and then lower the cost for everyone. Then when we come to the use case again, the wide acceptance will happen when you have something that will help everybody. I mean, it's fastest throughput, which maybe is not the problem here in South Africa, but it could be in healthcare, in the governmental healthcare. It could be in traffic management. It could be anything. But we're yet to see something useful. But the creativity and the innovation of the African, which I've seen many times, living 6 years here in the continent, is going to be essential for the success of 5G. It's not putting it there and it's going to work. There is more work to be done on top of it.
And all of this, Alan, remains possibilities and promises and big hopes unless the spectrum, and there's a clear allocation of spectrum. I'd love for you just to bring us up to speed in terms of where are we on the spectrum conversation in South Africa, and if you are following the spectrum allocation developments in other parts of the continent, how does that compare to what's happening here?
Well, so in South Africa, the current white paper says that for the purposes of 5G, the government is considering 3 options. One is to give the spectrum to the existing players according to their demand. So in other words, Vodacom would get the most, MTN would get the second most, Cell C would get the third most, Telkom, etc. That's probably politically unpalatable, but it's one of the options. The other option is to give the spectrum to new competitors like Rain and let them compete. I think that's a great option. In the case of Rain, they are launching in the next week or two, and they've said Cape Town and Joburg. So does it solve the digital divide problem? No. But does it create more competition? Yes. And then the last option that the government is considering, which is the favorite option at the moment, is to effectively nationalize the wireless networks and create a single company called the Wireless Open Access Network. I'm not sure who's going to run that and who's going to own that. And then some other government will make sure everybody in the country's got 5G. So those are... So when I look at that morass, and I'm sure you look at that, that doesn't sound very exciting. And to me, I wouldn't build a business around 5G spectrum right now, unless you already have the spectrum, because it's going to take a long time for the government to figure out what it wants to do.
In other parts of the market, in other parts of the world, if we were to lift best practices, because as you've said, these 3 scenarios really don't actually create that much enthusiasm about at least putting one's money behind it. What has worked in other markets? Is it about allocating to existing players? Is that the most effective? Is it about opening the playing field and allowing new entrants to come in? Or have we seen governments nationalizing the allocation of spectrum, as we've said here, and as a third option? Has that worked effectively? What actually works in other parts of the world?
Well, I'm no real expert on this, but I know China kind of works on the basis of the government owns the network and it's like all one big company, and it all works over there. That's the one exception to the rule that is the government shouldn't do it. In places like America, they kind of give everything to the incumbents, but they've got a pretty big digital divide over there, so I'm not sure that works either for the purposes of broadening internet connectivity. I must say it's pretty hard doing a telco from scratch, so that's also like a highly risky proposition. I just think we're trying to solve 2 problems with one bullet. If you think about telecoms the way we think about water, water in South Africa, everyone's got tap water. You get like tap water free. But if you want nice tasting water and you want water in your car whilst you're driving from A to B, you buy Valpre, right? Now compare that to data. So mobile data is like Valpre. It's like the super convenient way of consuming the internet in your car or at home or whatever, but it costs money. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take Valpre and make it come out of the taps in your bath and your shower, and you kind of need a parallel infrastructure layer. Valpre will always be there, and the guys will always make money out of Valpre. Mobile data will always be there, will always make money out of that. But South Africa had quite a strong fixed line base, which then was smashed by mobile, and a lot of that copper infrastructure was stolen. But now this fibre-to-the-home kind of infrastructure is coming into play. And in my opinion, the spectrum's got nothing to do with the digital divide in South Africa. The thing that will solve the problem is when we get more fibre to the home for all households in South Africa, not just the 1 million that are in high-income suburbs. And that'll run in parallel to the mobile infrastructure. You'll have an amazing 5G network because all the operators will do it because it's got all these benefits for the high end of the market. But for the man in the street and the rest of us, it's going to be fibre to the home.
Fibre to the home, and I'll come back to you in a while, Alan, and ask you to speak a little bit about Project Sizwe and how it links to that vision of everybody being connected and having that fiber to the home. But Antonio, I'm keen to understand the experience of Angola in particular when it comes to the fiber, the allocation of spectrum, rather, and the regulatory play in Angola, and whether there are lessons to be lifted out of that experience for South Africa and other markets as well.
I don't have also a very big experience about the way that the regulator is doing that in Angola. But today in Angola we have two types of license. So we have a general license that the operators that have that license could operate fixed and mobile networks. And another type of license, what we call a multi-use license for the ISPs. Okay. And the way that now they are allocating the spectrum still under discussion, because this is really an issue everywhere. So, and when it comes now to the 5G, we don't have very big experience because this is a brand new technology. So we have to see the real cases coming up so that we can learn from that. Because it's not many things to be compared in terms of the 5G allocation itself.
So, Nicholas, to that point, I mean, one of the things that Ericsson is really focused on is supporting that transition from 4G to 5G. And you know, one of the things you've said earlier is that when you have a good 4G network, it makes that transition slightly better than if you didn't have a strong 4G network. And I guess my question is that if you look at you're overlooking Africa and the Middle East, but if you look at the map of Africa, where do you see the most promising movements in terms of transitioning to 5G, and even if they haven't started using 5G commercially, because we know that that's not there yet. But what are some of the things that you're hearing that are indication of good policy, readiness to invest, and all of the little ingredients that would make for a successful transition from 4G to 5G? Are there hotspots of positivity in Africa that you're seeing?
Africa is the fastest growing mobile market in the world, so I'm extremely positive about the continent as such. Then it's been lagging the rest of the world for some time. I mean, if you look at 4G, I mean, the penetration rate of 4G in Africa is 7% today. 7. So 93% do not have 4G. We expect it by 2024 to be around 30-35% on the 4G. So there is a way to go. Meanwhile, what we need to do is to look on the rest of the world, because we have 24 live networks signed. Ericsson has installed and is running 24 live 5G networks around the world right now. So we are looking, what can we learn, what can we pick, what new ideas are there, and so forth. And we are discussing with the community on how it can be applied to Africa. The most, I think, South Africa, I mean, technologically, because they have a good 4G, would be ready. Then in the north, other countries such as Morocco. I'm just saying names, but there is a leveling up of the whole 4G across the continent happening right now. Meanwhile, while getting the information of what can be done with 5G, that will be the catalyst of that. But we are not there. It's not going to happen today. It's going to take time because you have the spectrum discussion and the use case discussion. But let's keep our ear open and not just simply reject it and say everything is good now. Let's keep eyes both on developing the 4G and having a sharp eye on the 5G for the continent, because I'm sure it's going to give benefits in one way or another.
So, Ellen, I want to come back to the question, and I think your statement was 5G is not going to solve the digital divide problem in South Africa or Africa for that matter. Bring that home for us, and in particular, talk to us a little bit about the work that you're doing with Project Isizwe, where you're rolling out free Wi-Fi in poor communities.
So the digital divide is not a technology problem. The digital divide is an affordability problem. In a country like South Africa, if you're on a contract, in other words, you've got money and you can get a contract from the operator, you pay 1% the data price of someone who's on prepaid. So if you don't have money in South Africa, you use prepaid airtime, you spend 100 times more on data.
Sure.
That's like moronic. But that's the commercial realities of the country. Now, until you've kind of got a situation where that 100 times up goes down to what the contract players, customers are paying, you'll just have a situation where most kids and adults in rural South Africa will just stay off the internet because they're afraid of how much airtime is being eaten whilst they're on. We, a few years ago, started an NGO called Project Isizwe, and we started working with municipalities, and one in particular, Tshwane, which is Pretoria, with the idea of making the internet like basic utility. So start thinking about the internet the way you think about roads and water and electricity. Instead of only those people who can actually afford water having water, everybody should have water. And the municipality started rolling out public free Wi-Fi zones throughout the city, specifically in the townships of Mamelodi, Garankuwa, Shoshongove, and Atteridgeville. And it became very successful, actually, as a kind of a template of like this idea, like, if you can't get internet in your house and you can't afford it, at least you should be able to walk to your nearest school or library or park and be able to get on the internet. Great. But that's not something, I mean, that the municipality took that and runs with it now. It's become a kind of a flagship project. My own thinking around the whole thing is not to rely on government. I must say, it was quite tempting and quite enjoyable to work with the government. You get to move the needle and it seems a little bit easier. Yep. But in the long run, it comes with a lot of risks. Trust me, it's risky. So better for the private sector to solve this problem itself. Whenever I think back, when I come back to these kind of mobile operators and the 4G, 5G spectrum debate, I can't see the economics of making it affordable for everyone. I just can't see it happening. I can't see how everybody in South Africa will be able to afford Vodacom 5G. But I also, as somebody with money, would like to have great 5G. So trying to make everybody use the same product is not going to work. You're going to come back to a parallel infrastructure layer. The one layer is going to be basically go back to the old days of fixed line, fiber, and that's going to replace all the copper, and that's going to give people kind of nomadic internet access, and that'll be affordable. And the rest of the country will have ubiquitous 5G, and you can do anything you want on that so long as you got money.
So, Antonio, again, we go to a different market with the intention of learning through a different lens. The story that Alan shares with us is, let's be realistic, he's kind of like pouring cold water over some of the really fuzzy feelings that many of us might have had as South Africans chanting and protesting for data must fall, feeling very sobered up after that contribution, Alan. So Antonio, from your perspective, the idea that every citizen in Angola could have access to 5G, is this something that you see as realistic and attainable, or do you come at it with a little bit of skepticism as well and say, hey, we're talking about a handful, and maybe we need to look at strengthening 3G or 4G connectivity in the more remote and outlying areas?
Look, it depends a lot from how long you are dreaming, okay? If the dream is short, then it's not possible yet. But if we are dreaming for a long period of time, then yes, of course. I mean, we have been talking about this ecosystem that have to be built, okay? So, for example, I compare more, the Angolan reality is quite similar to other countries in Africa. But when I compare to Brazil, for example, we have in Brazil very specific and very interesting examples that we have rural areas now completely installed with fiber. So people don't have electricity in some of the cases, but they have fiber. Sure. Okay? So we are coming to a point that we will converge this network. And when that network will be really converged, then we will have the capabilities to have different layers of users with different capacity of purchasing. And of course, 5G at that time will be then full operational, because the industry are going in that direction. Is no way to stop it, okay? So self-driving cars will be a reality very soon. So the robotic is a reality. So and the cost of that result is even cheaper. So we can be more efficient if we use robots in the industry, for example. And to do that, we do need the 5G network to be full operational for that cases. But it's still another parts of the equation that we have to align, okay? For example, for us in Africa, our know-how is still very low. So we have to give capabilities to people to grow up and to learn what we go to use in the future. Okay? For me, for example, the most important part today is probably giving access to the basic internet.
Yeah.
Because with the basic internet, people could learn. And if they learn, they will then start dreaming about the 5G network. And this then becomes a reality. But we have to go to these baby steps and grow up the process.
Baby steps. So we're going to close off this conversation in an interesting way. We've had some optimism, some dose of reality, and some dreaming that has come out of the conversation. And so you will notice that we've got cameras in the room. And when we have cameras in the room, it also means we are looking for a good story to run at 7 p.m. When the news is running, right? And so, as you will know, that when the news is running, we need what we call a really good strapline that we're going to put underneath you. And that is a really good statement, short and sharp and concise and to the point, that captures the essence of this conversation. And what you're going to do, and Nicholas, if you look away from me, then I'll make you go first. What you have to do is finish the sentence, and the sentence is 5G in Africa. And all you have to do is finish the sentence. Remember, it's just a sentence. It's not a paragraph. I only have one strap to give you for the evening news. All right? So, you ready?
I'm ready.
You ready? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, as we close off this conversation, Nicholas Bixell, Vice President for the Middle East and Africa at Ericsson, starting his sentence with 5G in Africa.
Is the platform for the fourth industrial revolution.
There we have it. Ladies and gentlemen, 5G in Africa is the platform for the fourth industrial revolution. Alan, I don't know what your editorial skills are like, but let's see if you can do one better. Start your sentence with 5G in Africa.
5G in Africa is bad news for telcos.
5G in Africa is bad news for telcos. Coming in again with the dose of reality. Thank you for that, Alan. And Alan Knott-Craig is Executive Chairman at HeroTel, and taking us home and closing off the news, Antonio Nunes, the CEO of Angola Cables. 5G in Africa, starting your sentence with 5G in Africa.
5G in Africa will be a reality one of these days.
I think I like that one better. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as we close off the show, 5G in Africa will be a reality in the future. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Remember, we do want to hear from you. Follow us at CNBC Africa. The hashtag is CNBC Africa Exchange, as well as WEFA. That's for WEF on Africa 19. I'm Nozi Pombanjwa. Thank you for joining us.